So as many of you may know, one of the things that I enjoy doing is running. Maybe not so much this time of year, but certainly throughout the year in the fall and in the summer. I really enjoyed running, ran cross-country and track when I was younger. And when I run by time versus running by mileage. And there's something I just picked up from my cross-country coach. And he did this to kind of keep us safe. When you're running by time, it's easier to not hurt yourself, get shin splints and all those things. Because, at different times you're more tired, more stressed. So you're going to put in the work you need to if you run by time. So running by time, I use my sports watch. I just noticed that my sports watch has been a cause of reflection for me. I noticed within this past year or so that many times when I hit my watch, when I'm done finishing a run, I noticed that there were many times, not all the time, but that I would hit the button on exactly the perfect number. So 25:00:00. Just seemed to be happening. Probably more times than I could really count. Well, I think there's two ways to look at this situation. First, as a matter of coincidence. Happened to be just the right time, the right watch. I happen to have the right reaction time, all those things. If something is coincidental, there's something kind of relatively meaningless about it. It kind of just happens. Coincidence is defined as a remarkable concurrence of events or circumstances without any apparent causal connection. So this is one way to kind of see this. Another way would be, with our eyes of faith that see differently. And while it could have been just a matter of coincidence, I kind of saw this whole thing as a matter of providence. Because when I would hit the timer and it would be on exactly the right number, I kind of heard this within me. Good job, David. You did exactly what you needed to do. You didn't do any more or any less. You ran the right distance with the right amount of effort. And what I heard, I think in a very real way, was real. So I don't think, it's just defining this by coincidence would be full, but one matter of providence. Providence is defined as the protective care of God as a spiritual power. So to that, God is not distant from us or our experience, but God is wrapped up in our lives and in our experience. And that what happens in life is not just random and meaningless, but in fact has meaning. So I think that's where, as Christians, we're called to embrace a posture of providence and not just coincidence. In our first reading from Samuel, we have the story of Samuel and Eli. Eli is the rabbi, the prophet, and Samuel is kind of the rabbi in training. And he hears one night, he hears this voice, this kind of thing within him that's calling out to him 3 times, and eventually he finds out from Eli that it's the voice of God speaking to him. Well, what didn't Samuel do? Well, he didn't take whatever this thing was for granted. He didn't count it off as just something small or insignificant. He looked at it, noticed it, and took it to, his wise teacher. This is huge. Because Samuel approached this situation more out of providence than just coincidence. Because rather, by approaching it as providence, that God is somehow maybe a part of this, rather than just kind of blowing it off as a weird thing, he found out a deep truth about God and about himself. Probably changed his life forever. That he prayed in a new way and entered into a deepened relationship with God. Do we in our own lives, and maybe when and where, do we kind of just assume coincidence rather than seek for and rely upon providence? And it's not just in small ways, when involving a run and a sports watch, but maybe bigger things. Maybe we're going through a season of life that's marked by some difficulties and struggles and questions. And to be sure, God never wants suffering for any of us. He never wants evil to be present in our lives. But he does allow things to happen and play out in a certain way so that our hearts and our lives and our souls can be potentially moved closer to him. The other day I was talking with my cousin Ryan for the first time in a long time. He's ex-military, served in the Marines for a number of years. For the past 11 years, he's been stateside working as a manager for OfficeMax. And mind you, he's a pretty intelligent and personable and well-qualified manager. Well, a few months ago, he was cut from his job because of OfficeMax having to rearrange things and consolidating because of the pandemic. And certainly losing a job is a pretty shocking reality for anyone. And maybe we could say it's a matter of coincidence, but a decent little severance package, and just about a week and a half later, he was offered a new job. And I'll say that selling webcams and laptops and office supplies wasn't maybe so much of his deep passion in life. But his new management job offer was much more related and palatable to kind of a post-military lifestyle. But in the course of the conversation, I just remember him saying, God works in mysterious ways. Right? And we've heard that phrase before. It's a cliche. But cliches are, I think, cliches because there's something profoundly true about them. That for however uncomfortable, it may have been over the years of working at OfficeMax, his prior job experience afforded him the possibility of this new job, probably one he wouldn't have gotten without going through this season of his life. As Christians, we're called to embrace a posture of providence and not just coincidence. And then maybe we can apply this to maybe even bigger things, like having to deal with this past year and the pandemic that we've experienced. And to be sure, God didn't want any of these things to happen. It wasn't a good thing. But at the same time, I don't think it's just all exclusively a matter of just coincidence, of kind of random meaninglessness. But that God can be found in our time, in our situation. So maybe this pandemic has been more of something of providence rather than coincidence. That things have been allowed to play out in a certain way. So to prepare our hearts, our lives, our families, our country for the coming times. Certainly, undoubtedly, I would say we've all learned and grown in this past year, individually, as families, as a country. Let's not write off, let's not give in to the temptation to write off some of the things that we have gone through or experienced as things just merely coincidence. But that in his providence, no matter how trying or unsettling the things we've experienced, that God will use all of these things for our salvation and for his glory. So brothers and sisters, our God is alive. He wants to communicate with us. He wants to transform our lives. And I think this is nowhere more true than in our gospel today. Maybe it was just coincidence that these random guys happened to run into this Jesus dude and their lives were transformed. Or maybe it was a matter of providence, that God was bringing them into relationship with Jesus, knowing them personally and what they needed. And as we see at the end of the gospel, ultimately, what does following Jesus result in? A complete transformation of our lives. That when Simon met Jesus and invited him into the journey, it was then that he became Peter. This name change is not something, I think, of a superficial or a coincidental reality, but something truly profound and life-changing. We are here in this place today, in prayer, celebrating this Mass. This is not coincidental. It is providential. God has brought us here all for some reason. May we continue to have our lives and our hearts open to God, who calls out to us here and now, and who will never leave us alone on the journey of life.